You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
It's McGuire Mondays with Pierre and Dan. And Pierre, we begin on a somber note as the hockey world said goodbye to Ken Dryden this past weekend. I'm sure we could talk the entire time about Ken. Your initial thoughts?
When I heard about it late Saturday, I was really surprised because I had spoken with a lot of people that knew Ken really well, and they had never said anything about, the potential for him being sick or anything else. And I found out after the fact that he knew for a while that he was sick and that he did have cancer, and he didn't want to share that with anybody. That kind of speaks to the man he was. He was an amazingly passionate person about his family and about life and about making his community better. It wasn't about him. It was about making things better for other people. He was always like that. The first time I ever saw Ken Dryden play, he was with the Montreal Voyageurs. I was just a little boy growing up in Montreal. I remember the 70-71 year that they were the Montreal Voyageurs. I saw them play against the Hershey Bears. His backup goalie was Wayne Thomas. Wayne Thomas and Ken Dryden died in the same calendar year. It's unbelievable to think about. But my ultimate memory is Montreal 71, Ken winning the Stanley Cup with Jean Beliveau's last year as a player, and the save that he makes against Jim Pappen when the Canes are leading 3-2, and Dryden moves from his left to his right and shuts the door on the great late Jim Pappen. And Montreal goes on to win the cup for Al McNeil as the coach and Jean Beliveau's last ever professional hockey game.
I miss the window of watching and remembering Ken Dryden play, but here's the memory I have of Ken Dryden. In 1990, they turned his book into a mini-series on the CBC. I would have been 15 at the time, called Home Game. And for a kid growing up in the country, I didn't have cable television. I'd never seen a show done about hockey. And the way it was done, I became a fan of Ken Dryden because of that mini-series. It had such an impact on me.
He had an impact on society. He was an amazing man. He was, Dan, everybody says, well, he's a Renaissance man or that guy's a Renaissance man. Go, and I know you have, but go, for those that haven't, go look up the definition of Renaissance man. Ken Dryden was the ultimate example of what a true Renaissance man was. Educated, capable of doing numerous things at a very high level, a huge appreciation for society, wanted to make people around him better. I mean, he was the ultimate example of a true Renaissance man. I think the biggest thing, though, about him that I will remember, the pose in the crease. No other goalie had done that before or after. And this is something that hasn't been brought up enough. There have only been 3 Rookies of the Year ever that have played for the Montreal Canadiens. One was Jacques Laperriere in 1964. One was Ken Dryden in 1972 after he won the Conn Smythe. And just this past year, Lane Hutson with the Montreal Canadiens. And there's magnificent piece of tape of Ken Dryden calling Lane Hutson to congratulate him this year. Even though Ken knew that he was sick, you would never have known that in the phone call and the piece of tape that's available. It's just fantastic. And it leaves, I think, long-lasting memories about Ken and just how great he was, not just as a player, but as a human being.
One thing the Montreal Canadiens do better than anyone else, and that is ceremony and honoring players. I can't even begin to imagine what they will do to honor Ken Dryden in Montreal at the start of this year.
I was fortunate enough to be around when the late Rocket Richard passed away. I was fortunate enough to be around when Jean Beliveau passed away. The way they saluted Jean Beliveau's wife was just unbelievable. I remember when Saku Koivu came back from cancer. I was working with you at TSN at the time, and I was there to cover the game, and it was fascinating. The Canadiens do ceremony and pomp and circumstance better than anybody in all of sport. But what they really do is they recognize the greatness of their players. And they really do the fans do a great job, but so does the organization. And now with Chantal Machabee being there, she's as good as there is in the sport. taking care of things like that. And I think the Canadiens do a masterful job with it.
Do you know what? I still go back and watch the closing of the Forum when they gave Rocket Richard,
The torch.
I believe it was a 20-minute, it was close to a 20-minute standing ovation. And he kept telling them, okay, stop. They would get louder. I go back, I cry every single time watching that on YouTube.
It's amazing. I don't know if I cry all the time. I was coaching in Ottawa then, and we were watching the game in our coach's office. And it was pretty special. You know, as a kid that kind of was a rink rat, and I'd go to watch the junior Canadiens and go watch the Montreal Voyageurs when they were there, and sometimes get to go to the standing room section of the Forum, which they actually had a standing room section, and watch the Canadiens with a famous trumpeter by the name of Dutchy. That was his name. It was pretty cool to grow up in Montreal and see all those great teams, Dan. But I just... The greatness of Ken Dryden. Think about this, Dan. 6 Stanley Cups in 8 years. Only Jacques Plante has the same amount. But Jacques Plante played 19 years in the National Hockey League. And he played on one of the most amazing franchises of all time, the 55-60 Montreal Canadiens, that won the Stanley Cup every year in a 6-team NHL. Ken Dryden's at the top of the list when it comes to winners and people that have helped revolutionize the game.
The current players must see the passing of Ken Dryden, and it has to enter their brain, the word legacy, when they look ahead to contract talks or pending contract talks, and they're like, wow, to be remembered like that by one team. Yeah, it says a lot. So I'm sure Connor McDavid, legacy, that's one word that is always swirling in his brain.
That is so well said. I've never even contemplated what you just said, but I think legacy matters a lot, especially when you do look at somebody like Ken, one organization, his entire career. And don't forget, and I know you don't, but this is for the fans out there. He decided one year, you know what? I'm not sure this pro hockey thing's for me. I'm going to go to law school. And he went to McGill and eventually got his law degree from McGill. And think about it, you go to Cornell University and graduate from an elite Ivy League institution like Cornell. You're one of only 2 players that has his number retired. The other guy's Joe Nieuwendyk. He wore number 25 at Cornell. Ken Dryden wore number 1. But the biggest thing is you're winning Stanley Cups in Montreal. You won the Super Series, especially games 6 and 8 over in Russia. And then you say, you know what? I'll take a break from this pro hockey thing and I'm going to go to law school. I'm not sure that could happen today. I just don't know if it would.
Changing gears, training camp set to open, and I saw an Instagram reel last night, and I thought of you, of what you must have witnessed with players showing up at camp back in the day. And it was a meme of someone sweating and overweight. They're like, players showing up at camp on the first day after forgetting they're a pro athlete during the summer. That's how it used to be. It's not like that now. No. But without naming names, you must have seen some guys show up at camp and say, What did you do this past summer?
We didn't have that problem in Pittsburgh, I will say that. But I will say this, in 1992-93, I went to Hartford after we won our second Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh, and Brian Burke was our general manager. And Berkey, to his credit, wanted to change the identity of the Whalers. He knew what Quebec had. He knew what Montreal had. And he desperately knew what Boston had, our biggest rival at the time. So he wanted a mean, tough, vitriolic team, let's say. He brought 86 players to camp. Wow. 86. And Dan, if you weren't prepared to play, Berkey let you know. But we had some guys that maybe weren't in great shape, but they knew how to fight. And so we had a very interesting camp, and there were some fellows that weren't very good hockey players and weren't in very good shape, but if they did the one thing they were probably brought to camp to do, they were pretty good at it.
When I was in Vancouver for a short stint working in TV, I was covering Canucks camp, and it was the only time I'd witnessed it and the only time I'd heard of it. A player showed up in too good of shape. Brent Sopel showed up, and they're like, you have too much muscle. You kind of have to slim down a little.
Well, Sopel was a tremendously fit guy, and he was a tough kid. He really was. I remember one of the last games I think Brett played was winning the Stanley Cup in Chicago. Very, very good person. I never had a bad visit with him, but he was physically fit. There's no question. He was as fit as any player that I had seen. You know, another guy that was like that, And the first time I ever saw him, it's Duncan Keith. He was playing for Kelowna in the Western Hockey League. He had just left Michigan State. Mark Habscheid was his coach. And Mark asked me to come in and run a couple practices. And they had a kid by the name of Weber Shea and a kid by the name of Keith Duncan on the back end. And they had a forward by the name of Blake Como, who was pretty darn good too.
Wow.
And what I remember the most is how hard Shea Weber could shoot the puck, but how physically fit Duncan Keith was. I was blown away. Mark Habscheid says, put him through the torture test, see what he's got. So I was doing stuff with him that I was doing with Paul Coffey or Larry Murphy or, Christopher Pronger back in the day. Duncan Keith just blew it out of the rink. He was so much better. I was like, whoa, this guy's really good.
Looking ahead to Leafs camp, when you see who's going to be there, do you see any surprises? We obviously have the guys, the solidified players that are going to be there. Is there anyone in the bottom 18 where you're like, okay, this guy could surprise people and steal a spot?
I think Easton Cowan's the player to watch. That's the profile player, Dan, I think I'd really be paying attention to because, number one, pedigree. We talked about legacy, amazing legacy with the London Knights, Memorial Cup champion, groomed to play professionally by Dale and Mark Hunter, who I think do a magnificent job in London. So I think Easton Cowan, as I see it, is probably the one player that maybe this guy could sneak into the top 6. And if he does, then maybe it moves, somebody else out of the top 6 that we've already got designated there. But I don't see a huge amount of opportunity for guys that are in the American League now. Not right away. I think eventually as there's injuries over the course of the year, you'll see more guys come up. But I think that's the player I'll be watching the most is Easton Cowan.
Easton hockey sticks getting so much love. I never saw a kid named Sherwood or Coho. Okay, Pierre.
Keeper Sherwood. Don't forget that.
Or Titan.
Yeah, no, Titan, no.
It's time to play 1 Degree of Pierre McGuire, where I turn around, point at a hockey card, and Pierre gives us his take on that player. So far, he's batting 1,000. We've never gone lower right-hand corner, so let's go over here right in the very corner. These are not predetermined. Oh, another one. Easy. Freddie Anderson.
Well, can't say enough good things about Freddie. Danish kid that went to play in Sweden. What I really liked and always respected about Freddie was even though he battled a lot of injuries, I think he's a guy that knew the difference between pain and injury and still does. He's got a niece, by the way, who actually a cousin, not a niece, a cousin who plays at St. Lawrence University for Chris Wells. She is an amazing goalie. She's an amazingly athletic young woman. She's great to watch. I've watched her and probably broadcast 3 or 4 of her games. She's a great player. So there's goaltending genes in their family, obviously. But I just think of Freddie as a guy that's been really close to getting to the top and just hasn't been able to cross the threshold. And I think the biggest reason why is probably because of health.
And he's carving out a lengthy career.
It's amazing. That's why I said, Dan, he's a guy that I think understood the difference between pain and injury. And that's why I think he's lasted as long as he has. And hats off to him. He's a really fine person. I don't think you'll find one teammate, whether it was in Anaheim, Toronto, Carolina, I don't think you'll find one team that'll have one bad thing to say about Freddie.
See, I love hearing that. It makes me appreciate a person and a player better. It's like when my producer friend told me that Michael C. Hall, he's the guy who plays Dexter.
Yeah.
He worked with him on a movie. He said he is the nicest human he's ever met. Not in Hollywood. He said on Earth. Cool. So I just became an instant bigger fan than I already was. When you hear someone's a great human, it makes you root for them.
That's awesome. I love what you just said. Thank you for sharing that about Michael C. Hall, by the way.
Yeah, he's opposite of the character he plays. See you, Pierre.
Bye, Dan.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.